Yana, I'm going to just put a spotlight on you so it'll be your lovely face that we can all see.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, hi folks. So just once again, welcome. We are recording, we are broadcasting to YouTube.
Just put a spotlight on you so it'll
I
be
have an echo here at the
lovely face that we can all see.
That's it. That's because I have YouTube on as well. And so we have an excellent guest speaker with us tonight for Women in Dark Skies, and her name is Yana Yakushina. And she is a research student. She's doing her Ph.D. In the University of Ghent in Belgium. And she is a researcher, a lawyer, a dark sky protection educator. She specializes in space law. And as I said, she's currently completing her PhD, but the objective of her study is the legal framework, an identification of a legal framework for the recognition of light pollution as an environmental problem. So Yana, I was delighted to meet Yana last year at an EU light pollution workshop in Brno in the Czech Republic. And it really brought home to me how, important it is for us to look into the environmental issues and policy and of course legislation, which here in Ireland we have nothing to protect us from light pollution. So Jana's work in Europe is especially important for us all. So tonight Jana's talk will encompass light pollution regulations and policy developments. She has worked with a number of international organizations, including the EU Commission, and she advises several NGOs, including the International Dark Sky Association, Starlight Foundation, amongst many others. So without further ado, folks, if I can welcome Yana Yakushina to Women in Dark Skies, and Yana, I will hand over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Georgia, for having me today, for inviting. Hello, good morning, good evening, whatever part of your planet you are. I'm very happy to be presenting today. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just a second. Please let me know if you can see my screen, so to be sure about it.
We can see, Yana, it looks great.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So today I'm going to be talking about legal and policy trends toward light pollution mitigation. And the plan will include the following. First, I will address, of course, most of you know what light pollution is, but still I'm going to slightly introduce the light pollution issues because I think it's important for the development of the regulatory framework. So I'll talk about the definition, the types or forms of light pollution, the sources of light pollution and its impacts. And then I will dive into the classification of legal and policy instruments. Because due to the lack of the regulatory framework for light pollution, basically across the globe, we have to, and there is no system, to identify certain categories, how and where we can find it. So first, I'm going to talk about what is legal and policy instrument, their distinction and similarities. Then I'm going to talk about binding and non-binding instruments like hard and soft law, basically. Then levels of regulatory levels, and then area of implementation. This section I'm proud of because basically I have identified several areas where we can find norms or policy actions with regard to light pollution mitigation. Another exciting part, I will give you the examples of policy and legal instruments based on the classification I'm going to be presenting. And in the end, I will provide you with recommendations and conclusions, which I found interesting. So, as I mentioned before, most of you know what light pollution is. And there is so many definitions, but I think that this is the most neutral definition of light pollution, which can be used in the regulatory framework as well as in the different scientific areas. So light pollution is an environmental problem which caused by increased, unwanted, and misdirected artificial light at night. What are the types of light pollution that can be identified? So we have light clutter, which is a bright and excessive grouping of light sources. Just imagine that you are standing in a crossroads and you have light which is basically everywhere. And then you can see two lighting poles switching on each other and creating this highly brighted area. The next type or form of light pollution is sky glow, which is brightening of the night sky over inhabited areas. These basically can be visible in every city or even small town and sometimes villages. This is the reddish or orange cupola across the city. The next form or type of light pollution is light trespass, is when light falling where it's not intended or not needed. The best example is when you're going to sleep and you have the street lights going through your window, so you can buy darker curtains to be able to sleep. This is a light trespass. And then we have glare. Glare is an excessive brightness which causes visual discomfort. Glare is very dangerous when we talk about actually road safety, because it creates a huge contrast in between illuminated roads and the dark area next to it, for example, forest, which can create a dangerous situation for the driver and inability to see pedestrian or, for example, cyclists. So what are the sources of light pollution, which I think is also important to be addressed? First, and the main source of light pollution, which is obvious one, is any outdoor lighting installations. So it's street lights, road lighting, billboards, any type of advertisements with a highly illuminating areas, security lights, floodlights, and sport lighting, and so on. The next one, which not a lot of scientists consider as a source of light pollution, but in my opinion we should, is indoor lighting installations. Sometimes the light from inside, for example, office building or block of flats, they can contribute to the general levels of nighttime illumination. And the third source of light pollution, which is also important, and I'm really grateful that actually I'm working towards mitigation of this source of light pollution. I'm working together with International Astronomical Union Group on the mitigation of light pollution from satellites. Satellite light pollution is particularly important, of course, for astronomical observation, because by building all these huge telescope and observatories to be able to provide and indicate the space exploration. However, due to satellites, we are not able to identify anything, basically. And it's also ruining the beauty of the dark sky for us. Sometimes when you're standing in the middle of the street somewhere in the town and you see that and you think that it's a falling star, it may be a flying satellite. So be aware about it. The next, which I found important thing to be discussed, is why actually light pollution should be addressed, why we should develop the regulatory framework there. So what are the light pollution impacts? The first impact, which is also quite obvious and I just mentioned before, is that we are violating the beauty of the dark sky, which was inspiring for over the centuries for all the people. And of course, it's violating astronomical activities, as I mentioned before. However, it's not the only impact of light pollution, and very negative adverse impacts of light pollution are imposed on environment, biodiversity, and habitats, including both terrestrial and aquatic, and a lot of different species. I will give you a small example of it. It's sea turtles. When the sea turtles are nesting, they're nesting in the seashore, which nowadays is very highly illuminated. And the young turtles, they actually direct themselves back to the sea with the use of the starlight. However, due to increased illumination on the shore side, they may go in another direction, for example, on the roads. And this is how we are actually minimizing and reducing the amount of sea turtle species. What is more interesting from the regulatory perspective, there was a court case between Greece and the European Court of Justice, which actually indicated that Greece failed to follow the obligation of Habitats Directive on the protection of sea turtles due to the light pollution. So now if you're in Greece, you can see that in some areas in the shore side where the nesting is happening of sea turtles, the lights are whether switched off or directed in a different way. These light pollution impacts are not limited for that. We also can talk about climate change and energy efficiency. Currently, as the most visible issue, we start reducing with the current energy crisis, we started using artificial light at nights almost across the globe. And it's important to keep in mind that more than 70% of our artificial light at night as a wasted energy, which costs us also $1 billion per year. And of course, this light is simply unnecessary. The next impact of increased illumination is, of course, outdoor aesthetics. Too much light is just simply ugly, especially if we're talking about the cultural heritage, which can be illuminated for attraction of tourists. However, if we change the lighting in a better way, which will first decrease the light pollution, it can be also more beautiful from the tourist perspective. The next impact is, of course, our human health. Humans, as well as any other living beings, depending on the natural day and light cycle. And when we're talking about the prolongation of the daytime during the nighttime, our brain started to produce more stress hormones, which can contribute to various diseases, both mental and physical, for example, depression, constant mood changing, anxieties, or even hormone-dependent cancer if we talk about the physical disease. And the last impact of light pollution, which is also very important, is actually public safety and security. And here we're mainly talking about public safety and the road safety. Road safety, I have mentioned when I was talking about that form of light pollution as glare. So our eye cannot adjust to the big switch between the highly illuminated road and the dark area next to it. So this can increase the amount of traffic injuries. And when we talk about the public safety, we generally have for 1 century, a perception that light is actually helping us to reduce the crime rates. However, the research shows that the increased illumination not necessarily contribute to decrease of the crime rates, or there is no basic correlation between it. And in some cases, when we change the illumination and put more light, for example, on a train station to make it safer, it may contribute to increase of crime rates. But again, when we talk about the artificial light at night, we're talking about the fear of crime. Of course, when we impose the artificial light at night, we're reducing the fear of crime, but not the crime rate. So it's a very, we can have a very interesting debate after it, because this is the most important issue when we're talking about artificial light at night. Okay, so of course, all these impacts and all the research being conducted during the last years didn't go unnoticed and resulted in the development of legal and policy framework. Before we start discussing them, I want to make a clear distinction between legal instruments and the policy instruments. We may say that these two instruments are very interconnected and interdependent. However, we should know the differences. First, always go the policy instrument, which indicate the need to reduce the artificial light at night, or indicate the need to have a further research on the impacts. So it provides a direction and a general framework for the future action, which may result on the development of the legislation. The example can be United Nations resolution or national policy frameworks. When we talk about the legal instruments, we're talking about the establishing of obligation to reduce artificial light at night, which can be enforced by the national governments and specific government bodies. Here, of course, we're talking about the legislation which was adopted in the different states, for example, Slovenia or Italy or France. So the next classification of policy and the legal instruments is binding and non-binding, or hard and soft instruments. So when we talk about the binding or the hard instruments, we're again talking that we're imposing an obligation and imposing a specific measure to reduce the levels of artificial light at night. These binding obligations, they're always adopted by empowered international or European Union or state bodies. And the examples can be decrees or laws, again, of the different states. And then we have non-binding or the soft instruments, which are recommendations or the guidelines for the measures which can be introduced to reduce the light pollution levels. And in comparison with the binding instruments, these instruments can be adopted by the various actors, including, of course, the government, but also by the professional actors or NGOs. Example can be International Dark Sky Association, which introduces the guidelines how to reduce light pollution levels. The next classification which we have to keep in mind are at which levels we can find the policy and regulations here. in this dark sky protection sphere. Of course, we have international level when light pollution is considered as transboundary concern and requires the international cooperation to take an action to address light pollution. Then we have the European Union level, which when the light pollution is considered as transboundary concern and requires the cooperation between the European Union member states. And then we have a national level, which also includes local level, when light pollution is considered as a national concern and government adopted whether in national measures or the local measures, depending on the area. And this is, we're going to the part which I'm the most excited about, is the classification where we can find actually dark sky protection measures and which areas of policy and law. So the first one where we can find it is environmental protection and emission control. In my opinion, the area of environmental regulations is the most important when we talk about the dark sky protection. Here, light pollution is considered as environmental concern, and we can use the existing environmental framework and existing measures, for example, environmental impact assessments to address light pollution. The examples of such instruments can be Germany and Insect Diversity Protection Act, which amended the General Environmental Law in 2021, and the European Union Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. The next area where we can find light pollution mitigation measures is urban planning and urban development. Here we can talk about that light is considered within the urban environment, and we create certain zones. So, for example, if we're talking about the nature protecting areas, we can create the complete switch off of lighting because it's just unnecessary. Then we talk about the residential and commercial area. And in this case, commercial area would be more lit because of the nighttime activities. So we're thinking about more the functional use of the areas and how much light do we impose. But in my opinion, it always should go with environmental protection together. The next area where we can find rather policy or legal measures is the Atmosphere and Air Protection Acts. Here, light pollution is actually considered as atmospheric pollutants. However, it's about a very debatable consideration. Czech Republic was the first country in 2022 which adopted Air Protection Act, which had measures with regard to light pollution mitigation with the air protection law. However, it didn't work out because it was very difficult to identify how exactly lights pollute the air or the atmosphere, and they didn't know at that time how to measure it. So this is why these regulations actually failed. The next area or regulatory area we can find the dark sky protection measures is energy efficiency. So here we solely focused on that light is the energy source and we have to minimize the use of the energy. The good example is EU Directive of Energy Efficiency Requirements for ballast for fluorescent lighting. However, very important to keep in mind that currently we're using very energy efficient lighting, which is LED. But LEDs, they actually severely contribute to the light pollution levels due to its color, and that they're very bright and very highly intense, actually. So we shouldn't also consider energy efficiency solely. We should consider other impacts which can light have together with that. The next area, regulatory area, is very specific. It's astronomy and observatory protection. So some countries they have policy and legislation specifically focused on the protection of the astronomy due to the high volume of astronomy within their context. The good example is Spain. It's a law on the protection of astronomical quality of the observation of the Institute of Astrophysics of Canary Islands, which was adopted in 1988. It's important to keep in mind that Canary Islands has a lot of observatories, astronomical activities in general, so they protect the dark skies quite a lot because of the international volume of the observation. The next one is dark sky protection and light pollution mitigation policy and law. Some countries and international frameworks started to adopt the measures or the instrument which specifically focused on the protection of dark sky and light pollution mitigation. The good example could be Croatia, Light Pollution Protection Act of 2019, or French decree. Another area where we can find, again, light pollution mitigation measures is green public procurement. This exists in the United States. And also in 2019, European Union amended green public procurement criteria for the road lighting, and it reduced a lot of different aspects with regard to road lighting. So the national state should consider whether there is a national parks or the purpose of lighting. However, it's important to keep in mind that in the European Union, the green public procurement criteria is a voluntarily adopted. It's not an obligation. So now I will give you some examples based on on the existing policy and legal instruments, and I will use the classification which I have mentioned. So the first, I will start from the international level, and I will go to the local level to follow the logic. So Convention on Migratory Species of 1979 is an international instrument which was adopted to protect migratory species, because protection of migratory species is a transboundary international concern. With regard to light pollution, the framework of the convention adopts policy documents which are non-binding soft law at the international level and solely focusing on the environmental protection. So what did they do? In 2022, there was 13th conference of the party, and they adopted resolution 13.5 and annex, which basically adopted the light pollution guidelines focusing on marine turtles, seabirds, and migratory shorebirds. These guidelines were developed by Australian government. Together with that, they adopted a number of decisions to basically elaborate further on these guidelines. These guidelines recognize artificial light at night as a threat for migratory species. They indicate a lot of specific measures depending on the type of the species, and recommend implementation of these guidelines and dedication and more attention to the night sky brightness, and especially important, its monitoring. In my opinion, what is not very good about this instrument is that the convention is focusing on the migratory species which are protected under convention. However, when we talk about the impacts of light pollution, it's much broader than just migratory species protected under this convention. So some species will not be protected. On the other hand, when we have an action at the United Nations, for example, CMES, this convention, it can follow up the recognition of the other convention, for example, the Convention of Biological Diversity, which can catch up and build up their own guidelines. If you would like to have more details, I wrote an article about the legal recognition of the Bonn Convention and the light pollution problem. The next instrument is International Declaration in Defense of the Night Sky and the Right to Starlight, or Starlight Declaration. This is a policy document which actually focusing specifically on the dark sky protection and include different areas, which I have mentioned before. It's a soft law, so it's not binding instrument, and again adopted at an international level. In 2007, there was an international conference in defense of the night sky and the right to observe the stars in La Palma in Spain. And during this conference, this declaration was adopted. Here you can see the main points of the declaration. It highlights the significance of the dark sky for the historic and cultural and scientific development. The dark sky should be considered as a common and universal heritage of humankind, an integral part of the environment essential for the proper and adequate functioning. They also advocate for recognizing the right to unpolluted sky as an inalienable right of humankind. They also considering the need to incorporate the light control measures within the environmental protection regulatory framework, which I found really important. And they also see tourism, like dark sky tourism, as one of the major instruments to defend the quality of the night sky. I actually, if we have lawyers here, I really recommend to read the declaration, the Starlight Declaration, because I think it's a very good document which can be used as a framework to develop in the future legislation and the policy document in this regard. The next document, I'm going to the next level, is the European Union level. We have the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, bringing nature back in our lives. With regard to light pollution, so they adopted the policy document. It's binding for the EU members at EU level, as I mentioned, and it's solely focused on environmental protection. What is important, the European Union Parliament recognized hazardous threats of light pollution on the biodiversity and human health. They were advocating to include light pollution in the Zero Action Plan. And Parliament also called the EU Commission to set up ambitious reduction targets for 2030 on the use of outdoor artificial light at night and develop the guidelines. However, we cannot talk about that European Union has adopted a specific policy or legislation yet, but we can see the common trend that European Union started to build up in this regard. In 2022, there was a report, review, and assessment of available information of light pollution in Europe. And also we can see that European Union developed the Horizon Europe program specifically dedicated on light pollution issues. Also important step in the European Union level, Georgia has mentioned it, there was an international light pollution workshop in Brno in Czech Republic the previous year in 2022. During this workshop, a policy document, which is also soft law, was adopted, which included different areas of implementation. So during this workshop was organized by Minister of the Environment of Czech Republic during the Czech presidency in the European Union. And the ministry chose light pollution as one of the major concerns of the environment. The result of this workshop was the adoption of Brno Appeal to facilitate the changes and to include light pollution into different environmental protection legislation and policy, including Zero Pollution Plan. To support this action, International Dark Sky Association, or now International Dark Sky, adopted the EU policy brief also to address light pollution and included several measures to address light pollution at the EU level. So again, we cannot yet talk about the European Union policy and law in this regard, but we can see the trend towards the recognition of the issue. Okay. I think it's not working. Sorry. The next one, I'm going to talk about the national level. I will talk about some national laws which were specifically adopted to the dark sky protection or within an environmental framework. So first, I'm going to talk about the Federal Nature Conservation Act, which was adopted in Germany, but with regard to light pollution, it was amended in 2021. So it's a legal instrument, so it's binding at the national level and it's solely focusing on environmental protection. The new amendments, the Insect Protection Acts, aim to reduce light pollution since it seems as a major driver of insect decline. They impose a general ban on the street lighting and eliminated advertising system and the national reserves, which is important again for the environmental protection and the biodiversity impacts. It provides a possibility for restriction on the use of sky beamers and ban insect traps which use the light sources. And they impose also an obligation to install new outdoor artificial light at night with environmentally friendly bulbs. But what is environmentally friendly bulbs is a big question as well. Germany also became the first European state which introduced on-demand approach of warning lights for the wind energy turbines and made aircraft detection light systems compulsory for all wind farms, both on onshore and offshore. The important here that we are constantly talking about renewable energy, renewable resources, and we are advocating for creating more wind farms because it's a nice renewables. However, most of the population were against the wind farms also due to annoying light, which wind turbines constantly emit. And Germany started a really good trend of reduction the light and having the light only when there is a specific purpose. So when to detect the aircraft and provide the aircraft safety. So it doesn't eliminating it all the time. The next act is Croatia, Act on Protection Against Light Pollution. It's also legal instruments and binding adopted at the national level and specifically related to protection of the dark sky or light pollution mitigation. Croatia adopted measures aimed at reduction all forms of light pollution and protection of the environment and human health. They developed lighting plan, an action plan for the construction and or reconstruction of outdoor lighting all over the country. They introduced measures to prevent excessive light emissions. They created an obligation that light should be directed downwards and introduced lighting monitoring measures. More detailed regulations were adopted by the ordinances. For example, they created the lighting zones, which I explained before, when we have a specific purpose of light in each zone, whether it's residential or the national park. So therefore, we can have a certain level of control of the illumination from the urban planning perspective as well. The next act I want to talk about, actually several acts in France, national commitment to the environment and the following document with regard to light pollution in France. This is the legal instrument, it's binding also at the national level and focusing on environmental protection. So in that act, alien emissions should be reduced to prevent disturbance of people and the environment, as well as limit the energy consumption. So they try to think that light pollution is a major concern, not only focusing on the energy consumption, energy efficiency. They also adopted the decree concerning the prevention, reduction, and limitation of light pollution in 2018. They introduced several measures, including curfews, upward light ratio, prohibition of light trespass, and in my opinion, the most important is administrative sanctions, from a formal notice to suspension of the operation of the light source. I think this is what we are missing a lot when we are thinking about the light pollution laws. We're missing the sanction and competences. Who is going to control the amount of light you're imposing and what can be done if there is too much light, where I can go to complain and what the municipality, for example, can do with regard to this violation. These lighting regulations in France will be compulsory or mandatory by 2025. The next one is actually Outdoor Lighting Ordinance of 2021, which was adopted in the city of Presidio, Texas, USA. I'm sorry in advance for pronunciation of the city. It's a legal instrument, it's binding, adopted at the local level, and introduces the lighting regulations. Again, they introduced different measures with regard to light pollution, which I found very interesting. They have different allowance of light with regard to whether it's a residential property or whether it's commercial or non-residential property. And again, which I found very nice is they have a responsibility for non-compliance with this local ordinance. You can receive a warning notice, and then if you don't change your lighting installations with regard to the requirements, you can get the fine $25 per each day of non-compliance. Okay, these were the little introduction of the regulatory system, policy and law movements. Before wrapping up my talk, before giving some recommendations and drawing some conclusions, I would like to talk about the Living Night NGO, which me and my colleagues have founded in Belgium. As we all know, Belgium is one of the most lead polluted countries in Europe, and it's very important to raise more awareness, to provide more educational activities within the Belgium background. So we found this association, and if you're interested, if you're in Belgium or you're just interested to contribute to our events or become a member or a supporter, please let me know. It will be very interesting to collaborate. So now I will wrap up the talk by drawing some conclusions. The current regulatory framework, which includes legal and policy instruments, is very diverse and very complex. We don't have a strict system which we can follow, which makes it very difficult for a lot of people, for example, lighting professionals, to follow up to compliance with it. It's mainly focusing on energy efficiency, rather other impacts which I have mentioned, for example, environmental disturbance or human health disturbance. We have a big problem with implementation, again, due to not identified competences of who is monitoring and who is responsible for bad lighting installations. What are solutions which I can think of, which I can propose? First of all, we have to have more binding regulations at all levels, from the international to local, and another way around. We should create a certain system which we can follow. We should have more cooperation and joint actions including within the different states, so international background, but also multi-actor involvement. I'm talking about the involvement and work together of lawyers, policymakers, scientists, and also lighting industry, so we can all develop the common language and develop the regulations which can be good both for astronomers and lighting professionals. I think it's important to find the balance between these two. Light pollution should be legally recognized as an environmental problem worldwide and included within the environmental protection framework. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important to use the environmental framework due to the fact that it's very strict, and we can use already existing measures and impose it with regard to the protection of the dark skies. Again, we should address all LN impacts, not only energy efficiency. We have to create sanctions for non-compliance. I highlighted France's example and one of the cities in the United States. I think this is a very motivational tool to make people compliant with the legislation. And we have to make more awareness-raising campaigns. Again, thanks for Women in Dark Skies for having this amazing initiative. I think it's very important to talk about this issue more and more and in a broader, different audience. And in my opinion, we should include light in the environmental impact assessments, and light should become a part of monitoring. When I talk about the environmental impact assessment, I'm talking also not only about the construction, reconstructions of building, I'm talking also about when we're sending satellite in outer space. I think environmental impact assessment is important there. Okay, stop spreading the light and start caring about the night. Thank you for your attention. It was my pleasure to be talking to you today. Thank you. I'm ready for Q&A if there are any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Yana. That was an excellent, excellent presentation. So I'm going to join you so you're not alone here. And what we might do is switch on all of the pictures. So anyone that does want to join us with their camera perhaps might want to switch on now, and then I can remove mine. Oops, and I'll remove yours by accident. How do I do this now? Remove spotlight. There we go. Right, that's better. We can see more people.
It's
Yana,
nice to see you all.
That was excellent and so informative and so badly needed across. I see we've got, not just Ireland here, we've got a number of countries joining us. So what I would like to do is hear from the audience. I think there might be a problem with the chat actually popping questions in at the moment, because it seems I might have inadvertently restricted it. So perhaps people could either pop a hand up or pop the microphone on, and we'll get to you to ask directly. And I think that's probably a more informal way of doing it anyway. So let me just see. Oh, Teddy, great, good woman. Teddy has her hand up. So previous Women in Dark Sky speaker. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. So I just have a question. I've never heard about light pollution affecting air pollution. Would you mind explaining that?
Well, there is a research how light pollution contributes to the air pollution. I can send you the link on that research. I don't know if somebody ever elaborated on it further, but basically during the nighttime, like the natural dark time, atmosphere cleaning itself, and light pollution, the amount of light can contribute to disturbance of this natural processes of cleansing of the atmosphere. So this is where we can see the connection. I don't know the specific chemical. I'm still a lawyer, but I'm trying to dig into different scientific perspective. But basically, when we talk about air pollution can be reduced, not of course, because we have a severe emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases, but during the nighttime, without the light pollution, the atmosphere starts to cleansing itself like a little bit, but due to artificial light at night, it can stop doing it. I will send you the research. It would be much better if you will read it by yourself, but this type of research exists.
Yes, please do. That sounds amazing. I've never heard about that. Thank you.
I will write it down. Yes.
Thank you.
Great, Yana. Thank you. Any links you send or want to share, Yana, I can forward them onto the group of attendees Next we have another woman in dark skies, Anna Levin. So Anna, thanks for popping your hand up there. Great. You want to go ahead? You're.
Yeah, I've got 3 questions. If that's a bit greedy, you can shut me up, George. But first is just a quick one. Will this presentation be available after this, if we want to recap?
I think Georgia will publish it online on the YouTube.
Brilliant.
As far as I know, but if you need it, I can send you maybe privately, because I'm not sure if I will think about it whether I can share it publicly or not. But I will. You can send me your email. I can send it to you directly.
That's great. I was scribbling like mad. I was also I'm coming in from Scotland, and I'm very interested in whether we can find a framework or a type of law that particularly applies to Scotland. And I was wondering if you had any guidance on that, if there was a group of citizens saying we really need like protection law here, where would we go? Are all these different laws listed somewhere, or how would you go about sort of raising this issue within a country?
I think, first of all, you need to have a lawyer from the Scottish background, like who will know where there is a certain legal database which existed. So first, what I will recommend to do, I think, is to do the general search on the existing lighting measures, like lighting regulations in general. So you specifically will probably not have, or I don't know, I have never explored Scottish law, but you may have, or you may have not, specific dark sky protection measures, but you will definitely have lighting measures. So you can have a look at that. And then I will start from the local municipality level to dig into like urban planning documents and look into like nature protecting environmental documents which they exist there. Again, the small local initiatives which can be created, like creation of the dark sky, which can be an attractive tool to first mitigate the light pollution, create a certain policy, and also like be attractive actually tourism area in the future. So municipalities can be interested in that because it's they can have more money by attracting tourists. So I will start from the municipality level, I think. I don't know if...
Are there any human rights laws or legislation that light pollution would encompass light pollution if that's infringing on somebody's
human rights? It's an interesting question, because in the group which I mentioned before, which is an International Astronomical Union, we talk about this human rights perspective and the cultural heritage perspective. And basically, from the cultural heritage perspective, the dark sky is a like common heritage, right? So it's a human right to have this dark sky in general, because it was inspiring us from the cultural and scientific perspective for centuries. Another human right which can be applied, again, in some countries, like, for example, New Zealand or Australia, they have indigenous communities whose rights are very protected. And if we talk about the dark skies, they're still using the dark skies to guide themselves with regard to like harvesting or any other activities. And in their law, because it's a part of like indigenous community life, it's also protected from the human perspective. You can look at it from cultural heritage of humankind, and also indigenous like communities law. I think this is two things. But from the legal perspective, we can think about other rights which can be interpreted. Like I would think about the rights of the adequate quality of the environment, because I consider dark sky as a part of the natural environment. So if we have the right of the adequate quality of the environment, why we shouldn't have a normal dark sky? Because dark sky is a part of the environment. So, it's about the legal interpretation. I think it's very interesting as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you both. And folks, just I've popped a note in the chat there. I had a restriction on it inadvertently. So if anyone would rather put a question in the chat, please do so. But in the meantime, our good friend Terry Mosley has a question for you, Yana. So far away, Terry, please.
Hi, Yana. Very interesting talk. I'd put the question in the chat, but I think it's probably better to give it live. I'm just wondering, have you any indication as to what's the main driver for controlling ALAN? Is it environmental? Is it people wanting to save energy and money? Is it for dark sky tourism or a combination? I know you covered a wide variety of different countries and different ways they're dealing with it, but have you any sense of an overall trend of what's the main driver for this?
Well, the overall driver, of course, is the energy efficiency, especially nowadays due to the energy crisis. All the states from municipal, like local level to the state level, they start turning off the outdoor illumination for the energy efficiency. But as you probably know, that LEDs, they're very energy efficient, so it doesn't make sense for me, to be honest. But this is the main driver. In some countries, like Germany is the biggest example, the environmental factor, the environmental adverse impacts is the main driver of the policy and regulatory change. So I think the main trend is energy efficiency across most of the countries. Some countries pick up environmental perspective, and some countries also have astronomical observations. If they have like a big astronomy, like for example, observatory, sorry. So if we talk about the Chile, or we're talking about Canary Islands. Yeah, this is how I see it. But maybe somebody has a different, but yeah, I think this is mainly energy efficiency, then environmental protection, and then observation.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your question.
Thanks, Yana. Yeah, I think the gap between the energy efficiency and the nature protection or environmental protection for biodiversity is a major issue. And I see, you mentioned wind farms actually, and it's another thing I want to come back to, Yana, but obviously we are all needing to go to renewables, especially here in Ireland where we have no other energy source that's not fossil fuel based. So once we go to renewables, we go to more and more LEDs that are functioning on highly efficient, we're going to have a bigger light pollution problem and no incentive to curb that. And that is a massive concern. So looking at legislation in maybe in France where it does seem to be quite aggressive, they are looking at cutting the emissions of light pollution as opposed to just making it more efficient. So I think that's our real conundrum, is how do we make sure that those things are really judged based on biodiversity and human, of course, well-being, as well as the need for energy efficiency. It's a big eek. I suppose as a question for you, have you come across, in terms of the implementation in those countries like Croatia where they have monitoring going on, and we heard from some of the speakers in that light pollution conference, but the implementation and the monitoring of it, and effectively the light pollution police, any real challenges that you've observed that would make that more difficult to implement?
Well, I'm still in touch with Damir, the person who was presenting during the workshop, and basically the law was adopted in 2019. It's also, we're coming back from this issue of public safety, and the perception of light is the main source of safety. So it took them 3 years. Like, I think in the end, by the end of 2022, they have adopted only all the ordinances which were like needed according to law. So they just basically starting only to really implement and see how it's going to work. But yeah, let's see. There is no really weakness. They had a lot of problems with adoption of certain ordinances, like zoning ordinances, which will require the switch off or reconstruction of lights, or implementation of like more automatic like switch off systems. So yeah, the public safety is always the main issue which they're experiencing, and the lighting police. And I don't know how they're going to measure their light pollution still, because they're still not clear competences, and how they're going to train all municipalities to measure light pollution. And there is a huge problems with light pollution measurement in general. So let's see how it will go. But currently the main issue was the public safety concern.
Thank you.
Your question, yeah.
Yana, we have a question from Pauline Cardmore. Are there studies on the impact of light trespass and human health, especially children's health? She's asking.
there are actually a lot in the PubMed.com, I think, the main source where you can find them. One of the recent interesting research was made by Dutch researchers. They were analyzing the mood changing and depression among teenagers. And they found out that light trespass and increased light pollution, like outdoor light pollution in the Netherlands, actually increased the level of depression among the teenagers. But I can send you some articles.
Oh, brilliant.
I was just going to ask you to do, that's very
Please.
interesting on the mood. Yes, and Anna's saying the same. Thank you. Folks, any other questions for Yana? I don't want to take up time when there's people that I'm sure have burning questions, because this is fascinating and it's, as I said earlier, so important for us. Not missed anything. Jed's helping me here on the questions. I've not missed anything, have I? No, okay. Well, looking at the solutions, I really loved your summary, Yana, and thank you, for that also. First of all, that we need to recognize that it is an environmental pollutant, and I think that's key in so many jurisdictions, no more than here and on other places. So before we even get to the problem of having, how we sanction it for non-compliance, we need to recognize that it is pollutants. So, looking at the 2030 EU biodiversity goals and framework there, I think is probably the easiest way, as you said, to start addressing that. And at least we have some hope through the zero pollution work that's going on. But sorry, we have another question I'm being told. Sorry, just one second. From Phil Green. Phil, do you want to ask away?
Hi, yes, hi there. I haven't been in this before, so thank you very much. This is all brand new to me. My question, I suppose, is that I live very near, I'm in Dublin 15, and we got a data centre a few years back, and it's out in the outskirts of Dublin. And this area was prior to that would have been just farmland. And relatively dark as a city goes, or suburbia goes, but now it's bright skies at night out there. There is no nighttime anymore. When they were initially getting it, they told us they were going to put bees into the actual complex. Now, my understanding of bees, if they see bright lights, they're going to work themselves to death. So I don't know if those bees are still out there, to be honest. All we see is bright lights. Further down, there's a pharmaceutical company, and they have this big sprawl of car park, and that's full lights all the time. And this is out where it was normally just arable land before. I'm just wondering, with the data centres, we're going to see quite a few of them coming into Ireland in the next few years. Have you any experience of that? Have you had seen whereby, do they put it down as a security issue that these data centres need all this light? Is it something that we can talk to people about? Really, it's just horrible, like going up there every time now and just seeing this and knowing that there's more possibly to come in the future. And I'm wondering, Yana, if you've had any experience of this before. Sorry, it's a very open question, I'm aware of it, but it's just something that's really, really out there in my face when I go to see my mom, Have you had any experience of this?
Thank you for your question. I didn't have specific experience with data centers, but I guess it's really related to the safety of these areas. I do had experience with the sport lighting, though. Again, in the Netherlands, they did have a lot of sports centers, and they also have farms which were highly illuminated. But a lot of complaints from the local citizens to the local governments and the higher governments, and also like they were going to the courts. They actually, in the end, managed to change the legislation in the Netherlands with regard to light trespass, because this is actually light trespass, which is disturbing for people. They rather consider it that way. And there is a lot of legislation on the light trespass across the countries. So if you don't have like specific dark sky protection law, maybe you can have measures with regard to light trespass, which actually exist in the UK. So yeah, this is interesting to see that way, to write a complaint first maybe to the company or maybe to the local government and consider it as a light trespass, which disturbs the people across. Because in the Netherlands, they managed to change the legislation, and now this light is shielded from this type of farms, because they still need light for growing some crops and stuff, but now it's shielded, so it's protected from the disturbance from the outside. Maybe you can try to make a complaint somewhere
And
in the national government.
is that under the EU? Because obviously we're not in the UK. Is there light trespass law part of some EU directive that Ireland would follow? Do you know, or is that something I must explore myself?
I should double check. I can send you the information. Please, you can leave me your data or send it to Georgia or something, and I will send you some information with regard to law, and I will also have a look at the Irish law as well.
Yeah, because I don't know about the UK law.
No, I can, sorry to nip in there, but the Nuisance Act in the UK covers that. We do not have that because obviously we're not under their laws, but we don't have any legal protection at all. That's the real problem. There's nothing right now. So that's what you could do, Phil, perhaps is drop us a line at Dark Sky Ireland. So there's a website, I'll put that in the chat, darksky.ie. And as a national All Ireland committee, we are working with various groups, and as best we can, it's still a voluntary network. As best we can, we're addressing sort of issues that affect more than one region. So we're trying to, tackle where there's, common lighting issues and data centers. It's come up before, not to that extent, but it would be good to have a communication from you, because at least then we can put it on the list for looking into through the network, if that's any help.
Okay, Georgia, I'll be honest with you. I think even if it's a case that if there's no law on that, the data centers, they seem to have a carte blanche at the moment, and I think that's really and truly a letter, because actually somebody brought them to court, and I don't think it's even having any impact there. I think that we're getting our data centers and just live with it and bear with it, unfortunately. But it's tough to see, because that it's causing harm. Yeah.
Do still drop us a line, Phil, though.
Okay.
At least we can keep you informed of anything else that we have coming up, or it logs it for us and it helps us make the case.
I will do, of course. Thank you, Georgia, and thank you, Yana.
Okay, we have a couple of hands up here, so I'm going to go to Margaret, and then Graham has a question, and Malcolm, did you say? Malcolm and Ray. And Ray. So yeah.
Thank you, Yana. That was really interesting. I just wanted to reply to Phil. I'm not a solicitor, but I'd imagine that if the light is so intrusive as to cause a nuisance, you could take a civil case for that. If a group of people in your area took a civil case, you'd probably have a very strong case in relation to the light. And as a group, maybe the Air Pollution Act provides that air pollution is also energy. That's actually included in the Air Pollution Act. So light being energy, it could be tested. But again, that would be a lot of money and effort, but it might be worth it, because once you get that case law, you might be on solid ground in relation to using the current Air Pollution Act of 87.
Margaret, you could be
Thank you so much.
Heading towards the precedent that we need. Just a quick one, Graham has said, is there any help out there to encourage lighting change for small private groups? So there's lots of that internationally, and I'll let you, Yana, perhaps mention one or two points. So any general to encourage lighting change for small private groups. So where would you point somebody, Yana? The IDA, I guess.
Small lighting groups. I think we should, it's about organizing this type of workshop within this small lighting group, just talking about how light can actually contribute not for our good, but also for our bad, let's say it that way. There's also an interesting group to communicate with. There's a Roland, and the Responsible Outdoor Lighting Group movement, which unite together lighting professionals. And they actually work together with other lighting professionals to basically educating them that they have to consider dark sky with regard of the implementation of lighting. So you can, you should look for a Roland manifesto, and I think this manifesto is very interesting to give to the lighting professionals because it's written by lighting professionals towards the protection of the dark sky. So we are not talking here about the complete decrease of light, complete switch off, but about the being aware of darkness when we are creating the lights. So yeah, this would be a small advice. And of course, like the workshops, awareness raising campaigns, and so on.
Great, thank you. Just putting something in the chat here as well. And maybe we'll go to Ray next. Hi, Ray.
Hi, that's a great
Dark Sky Ireland, I should say.
Yeah, that's right. I'm the Galway person there. So thanks very much, Yana. Before I get to a question for you, people were talking about maybe existing regulations that maybe you can hook into. One that I noticed in Galway, going back 15, 20 years, is that they had a city, 7-year development plan or something. There was a clause in there about protection against exposure to electromagnetic radiation. It was put there for radio masts, cell phone towers, that kind of stuff. But light is also electromagnetic radiation. So if you can find something like that, they may inadvertently help us. But anyway, that's by the by. My question for you is that you told us about all these successful campaigns to put in legislation and guidelines. What about the ones that didn't succeed, but came close? There was a little momentum, there were, members of parliament lined up, and it just didn't work. And why would that have happened? Was it be lobbying from the industry, or what happened?
Actually, there are more cases when legislation didn't succeed rather than successful legislation. Again, the main concern is lobbying of lighting industry, because they think that if we're talking about the protection of dark skies, we're always talking about the complete switch off of lighting, which is not of the interest of the lighting groups, which is very obvious. And the first concern, and the second concern is about public safety, when the national parliament or the national government is not agreeing on the light pollution regulations, because they again associated it with complete switch off. So people just don't know about the middle and what is the good lighting, that it's about the purpose, about the direction and the amount of the color, rather than light or no light. But this is how most of the people see it. So I think these are the main two reasons: public safety again, and a lobbying of lighting industry.
So it's lobbying basically that kills it. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to gather forces, Ray, for Dark Sky Ireland. Yana, thank you. And Phil, just to go back to your question, I had a direct message from Tiffany Nichols, who I think is a friend of Yana's, and she kindly said that she has her email address, which I'll pass on to you, and she may be able to help you. She has some, she's working on other issues in relation to data centers for light and noise. So there's another offer there. So it's great to put these things through and to, to share information where we can across jurisdictions. So it is really helpful. So folks, one last, we're over 8 o'clock. We usually keep these to around an hour. So I thought this one might go over because it is, as I said, there's so much to ask and such a wide subject. So is there any other burning questions before we wrap up? We just have a look, see if there's anything else in the chat. Anyone else with a hand up? Nope. Nope. Okay. With that then, I must thank you, Yana. I've been looking forward to this, and I really appreciate the input that you and the time that you took to put that presentation together for us. It's really insightful, very, very useful for a lot of people, self included, and I appreciate that. So, and thank you to everyone who has joined us this evening and contributed with the questions and queries. And folks, we look forward to the next one, and I'll be in touch if you're on our mailing list, and if you're not, drop us a line and we can add you, no problem. So Yana, thank you very much. Good, folks.
Thank you very much, Georgia, for inviting me, and thank you everybody again for your attention, for being an amazing audience, and for your great questions, which always give me a lot of insights and at the same time anxiety of the development of light pollution legislation. Thank you very much.
No, not at all. And I should say thank you to Jed for co-hosting tonight as well. He's I would have missed a couple of questions if it wasn't for you. So thanks, folks, and good night until the next one.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.